So I'm excited about this section because it touches on one of my passions. I'm fascinated by drones, robots, and all that. And I was lucky to meet Missy Cummings some time ago. She's an MIT professor, but she has a particularly interesting perspective on drones and robots because she's seen, you know, all the problems that we could avoid with robotics. Missy was one of the first naval carrier pilots, flew A4s and F-18s and such, and has landed jets on carriers. And it's apparently a sort of medieval and inefficient and dangerous process, and revealed that there's got to be a better way. So tell me a little bit about what it's like to land. What do you learn when you land a fighter jet on a carrier, and what can we do to fix that?
Well, I was very fortunate in the Navy. I flew two aircraft, the A4 Skyhawk and then the F-18. And the A4 is kind of like a MG by today's standards, and the F-18 was a fly-by-wire, very fancy, highly automated aircraft. And when I was flying the Hornet, this was in the mid-90s, there were two things that happened to me that made me realize that my job as a pilot was in serious jeopardy. And the first one was the Tomahawk missile. The Tomahawk missile is a missile that's been used for 20+ years with pinpoint meter precision accuracy. And when a missile, and that's what fighter pilots do, is we try to drop bombs with precision accuracy, but the missiles were always better than the pilots. And then what makes all naval pilots better than everyone else on the planet, particularly Air Force pilots, is the ability to land on the aircraft carrier. And then when I was flying the Hornet, I saw the ability for the Hornet, as well as other aircraft at the time. They got really good at something called the Mode 1 approach at the aircraft carrier, which is where you actually set the aircraft up, touched a couple of buttons, hands off for the whole landing. And that was really humiliating, actually, in some sense, because that is what made me better than everyone else, that I could do that myself. But yet, here the computer was taking itself off the aircraft carrier better than I could, landing itself on the aircraft carrier better than I could, and doing the mission better than I ever could. And so I actually took a step back, and I saw it a little bit faster than probably most other pilots in the military. And I said, you know, the heyday of the fighter pilot is over. And I would even be so bold to say the heyday of the pilot is over. And that's actually when I jumped ship and went into academia to do research. So
you were the best of the best. You were the Top Gun, and you realized there was an even more Top Gun, and that was the computer itself. That's the aircraft side. Meanwhile, there's all sorts of people scurrying around like ants on the carrier deck. What did you learn about that?
Well, it's actually a very dangerous place. On most cruises, 1 or 2 people are lost because they get blown overboard on the side of a carrier. There are lots of accidents. There have been some big fires on aircraft carriers because of the mismanagement of resources on the aircraft carrier. So one of the things I did, and if we can cue the picture, that would be great, is in research, we started to look at this problem and think about, well, how could we actually use automation, not just for the takeoff and the landing component of the aircraft carrier, but actually the movement of the vehicles around the deck? And Sebastian, you heard from earlier, he was actually my great inspiration for this, because I saw the work that Sebastian had done and the rest of the DARPA Urban Grand Challenge crowd, and I said, well, you know what? We only need to move in a very small space, but it's probably the hardest logistics problem there is. And I think automation could actually help change this and help make it safer so that you can have either some robots and some humans on the deck, and ultimately where the military probably will go is to have completely automated carrier decks.
Can we cue up the first photograph, please? So what are we looking at here?
So that's actually how it's done today. When you talk about medieval, it's almost like a fun 5-year-old game where they actually move the little aircraft and trucks and whatnot around the aircraft carrier deck to get a feel of how to plan and where to go and how we're going to conduct operations. And if we could play the video, I'll show you a quick video of some of the research that we're doing at MIT. So this is basically, we've digitized the aircraft carrier deck, and it sits on a big tabletop, and now you're seeing it hooked up to a motion capture room. And what this does is this program allows humans to collaborate with algorithms developed by some urban grand challenge people to actually do a better job learning how to park aircraft, how to stack them. You're seeing them getting ready to land on the aircraft carrier, basically an air traffic control task. The really unique thing about this project is what we're showing is, humans are doing a pretty good job at these operations right now, but they do even better when they have the assistance of algorithms. But algorithms can't do the job alone either. They actually need some supervision to help reason through some areas of uncertainty when problems crop up that the automation doesn't expect. So this research and some other projects we're doing at MIT are really showing the power that when algorithms can work with humans, the whole system performs better than either alone.
So what is the future of flight? We've recognized that there's many things machines do better than humans. But when you look at sort of, commercial air travel, for example, what is the role of a pilot, if any?
The role of a pilot in today's world is primarily, and I get a lot of hate mail, so, if you feel the need to email me, I'm not going to respond. Is to monitor the system. I mean, this is true of fighter pilots, and it's true of commercial pilots. You're there to monitor in case anything goes wrong. The state of the art today is that a plane can basically fly itself. And then, as recently that occurred here in New York, when something happens in the bird strike, Chesley Sullenberger was able to take over. And that's when he was really important in these times of extreme emergencies. But for the most part, your pilot is monitoring, waiting for something to happen. And in fact, what's problematic about that, and we see it occasionally pops up in the news, the pilots are getting bored, they're potentially falling asleep, playing on their laptops, tweeting, texting, it is a problem. And it's a problem not because these pilots are unprofessional, as the FAA worries. They're just humans. Pilots are humans like all of us, and when we're working with highly automated systems and there's not a lot to do, we're going to find something to take our attention away.
So the classic comic strip is that the factor of the future was going to be, was going to involve a man and a dog, and the dog's job was to keep the man away from the machines. But we have 2 pilots right now, and this is 2 pilots who have basically nothing to do on a normal flight.
That's right, and you'll be happy or alarmed to know that there's actually a government-sponsored project right now looking to go from 2 to 1. And the expectation is in the future that FedEx and UPS and the cargo planes, they will become UAVs faster than we all realize. But it won't happen in this country first because of our regulatory problems. It's going to happen overseas. And then I think once we start to get shamed a little bit in terms of other countries making more money than us in this area, then we'll jump into that game. And then, of course, the follow-on question is, when will commercial aircraft be unmanned? And I will tell you that there's no such thing, because you're always going to need somebody on board to take care of unruly drunk passengers. And so the unmanned passenger aircraft isn't really a possibility, but who is doing what on the plane? I mean, we could envision a time where the lead flight attendant was also the lead pilot, right? Do you need somebody in the cockpit all the time? Is there a set of skills that could be passed amongst the crew? And what about giving air traffic controllers more power? These are all research issues that are being looked at right now.
So we think of drones as being sort of, military technology or very exotic sci-fi stuff. But, I mean, just to kind of put things in context, people here in the audience, when they go to JFK and they get on an Airbus to fly to London, is there a possibility that no pilot touched the stick from takeoff to landing?
It is technically possible right now that is true.
That plane taxied itself onto the runway, took itself off, flew itself to London, landed itself, taxied itself back.
Not every airport is equipped with a taxi, because you have to have some ADS-B technology to give you the really precise movements that you need. But once all airports have that, that will be possible, and that is done in some airports in the world today.
So we fly drones all the time.
That's right.
We just don't think of it that way.
There's a reason Airbus is called Airbus.
So we've got We've got just a few minutes. I wanted to touch on, we're talking about autonomy, autonomous vehicles broadly. Now, these are aircraft, but Sebastian was talking about cars and beyond. I know you've been doing some work in agriculture as well, and you work with John Deere, among others. Tell me about the future of robotic farming.
This is an area that I don't think a lot of people don't hear about because it's not nearly as sexy as aircraft carriers and Iran-captured UAVs that make the news. But in fact, we have a real problem in this country and other countries where we just don't have the manpower to do the farming that we need. And so what's kind of interesting to me on a socio-technical level is farmers are actually very conservative. The John Deere crowd, you know, I come from a farming family, and this is not a crowd that generally lends itself to robots, except that they can't get enough people to work the fields. And so if we can cue up the next picture, one of the big up-and-coming technologies is crop dusting. And this has already been happening. And, oh, well, let me skip ahead to the tractor. John Deere, who allowed me to show you this picture, this is a robotic tractor that's it's in the orchard doing spraying. And if you'll note, here it comes. There is nobody in that tractor. And then every fighter pilot likes to have a formation flight going on, and what you'll see is there's one coming right behind it so that they can actually collaborate in some sense and do this task that is very labor intensive but actually very boring. If you've never seen a current day John Deere tractor, you really should, because they have more TV and entertainment devices in the tractor than you could possibly imagine. It's the sweetest entertainment suite. And why is that? Because it's really boring, and these tractors can do a lot on their own. And so instead of that guy being bored in the tractor cockpit, let's take him or her out and turn this over to the robot so that the person can do something
And
else.
that's a LiDAR system.
That's right.
A laser,
that's right.
A laser
Just,
ranging.
Sebastian, it's very similar to the same systems that Sebastian uses.
And given the amount of pesticide that was being sprayed there, it's probably a good thing there was no.
Absolutely. I mean, you can imagine that this is, you know, we talk about UAVs for dull, dirty, dangerous missions, and we hear that a lot in the military, but we don't really think about, well, where else would that be? And certainly the farming world with the pesticides and the crop dusting that's likely going to take place very soon. In fact, the USDA is looking at trials of that right now. We're going to see UAVs in our everyday life to support the food we eat. Yeah, there's a picture of the Yamaha R-Max, and right now these are manually controlled to do crop dusting in places like Japan, but we're going to see this more and more in places in our own backyards by, you know, a farmer who can touch a button on his iPad and the helicopter takes off, and it actually can do crop and health monitoring as well, and it will talk to those tractors to actually do an integrated management all from the armchair of the farmer.
So I'll drive by a farm, and there'll be robot helicopters dusting, coordinating with robot tractors doing the harvesting. You know, we already have presumed, you know, the cows are all milked robotically, et cetera. So the solution to the sort of depopulation of rural America is to replace them with robots, just as Japan is replacing elder care with robots.
That's absolutely correct. And it is probably not nearly as sexy as the military UAVs that you hear about, but it's equally or as more important.
So tell me a little bit about the deployment of these. When are we going to actually see the tractors, the helicopters? And I know you already have manually controlled helicopters, especially in Japan, but autonomous helicopters, you say the iPad sort of, you know, do the job thing.
Right. You know, I actually think it's the people in this room who will dictate that. As soon as the business model is made as successful, and the technology is pretty much ready to go. John Deere is, you know, has a few of these tractors in place in special places. I think it's just making the connection to the business model. How are we going to do the support and the infrastructure? How are you going to call for, you know, if your tractor gets stuck, how are you going to get it unstuck? So I think we're there. We're on the cusp of that. We just need the business model to be.
And regulation? Regulation? Is it legal?
Sure. You know, fortunately, we don't have an equivalent of the FAA for farming equipment, except that you're going to have to look at those legal liabilities. So all the liability that goes along with vehicles applies to the tractors.
So those flying the K-Max, the
the helicopters actually, you know, they have FAA restrictions on them, and in fact, the FAA it's just been recently mandated that the FAA has to figure out how to integrate these into the national airspace. But right now, that they're operating at altitudes that make that feasible.
Which is to say below 400 feet.
That's right.
And all that.
That's right.
You said that John Deere has a couple tractors out there. Can you tell us anything about which applications, what kind of?
They're actually to do tilling, other farming. You know, in fact, they go and they will drive around a field to actually learn. That's what the tractor learns, the dimensions of the field, learns where to go. It's basically virtual lines that it puts down on the field, and then it just does those lines and over and over. So it's actually, you know, it's a step up from just manual control, but there's a lot more autonomy that is in development and that will be coming, such that you can do a lot more integration with other vehicles as well.
I mean, it's basically a fancy Roomba.
That's right.
Of sorts.
That's right.
And you know, the natural question is, you know, what could go wrong? When you worry about human-robot, you're focused on human-robot interactions. When you look at this, what, you know, obviously there's huge opportunity, labor savings, et cetera. What worries you?
For the farming community, that doesn't really worry me at all, because this is the perfect place for vehicles to operate. You know, if they get stuck, they stop. This is the great thing about ground unmanned vehicles, is that if anything goes wrong, they just stop and you come out and fix them and you can remotely disable them. Unmanned aerial vehicles, a little bit trickier, right? And this is in fact why, rightly so, that the FAA should be involved at some point, because you need to figure out that for our Max, the Yamahas, if there's an emergency, will it auto-rotate to a safe place and avoid people? I will tell you that in the agricultural world, again, I'm not worried because there's not that many people out there. In the carrier aviation world, safety is a big problem, because we're trying to figure out how to make planes, robotic planes, taxi with manned planes, all directed by humans on the ground, that are just missing each other by inches. And so the safety component is still a major concern in these tightly constrained spaces, and we don't have the solution for that, but just stand by.
You gave me a sort of prediction of a date. When will I first see this, you know, robot tractors or the helicopters? Would you know, is it years or months? Or?
Yeah, you know, 1 to 3 years.
1 to 3 years. In America?
In America.
In practice. One last thing is that you're on sabbatical right now from MIT at the Office of Naval Research. What are you focused on now?
I'm helping the Navy with a robotic helicopter that is what we call, we're trying to put the frontal lobe on a helicopter, developing a sensor package that allows any helicopter with the sensor package the ability to be called by somebody with an iPhone who has an emergency, to bring in emergency supplies or to take away casualties. For example, somebody in the military who's been shot in the chest needs emergency evacuation, and this helicopter is smart enough to take off by itself, find its own way, find its own landing site in very hostile terrain and potentially under fire, to figure out where to land, tell the person, communicate with the person on the ground with nothing but an iPhone, and then pick the trauma victim up and then whisk them away.
So let me get this right. Soldiers in the battlefield, somebody's wounded, they whip out their iPhone.
That's right.
Press a button.
That's right.
A robot medevac helicopter.
That's right.
Comes, lands, takes their comrade, presumably gives them some life support.
We have automated critical care systems inside the helicopter.
Robotically flies them back to the hospital.
That's correct. That's the future.
How soon?
7 to 10 years is when we're hoping this will be operational.
Wow. Well, on that note, please join me in thanking Missy Cummings.